gold. And remember, you get 1 gold for selling something, so that's just a way to gain 1 extra gold. You do need you need a free spot though, which we don't have. I think for now I'll just level up my flying fish a little bit. I will then roll. Oh look, we got some chocolate. We have some chocolate. Also tomato. Give 1 pet tomato perk. Deal 8 damage to the last enemy before attacking. Interesting. Anyway, I'm sort of thinking I got 6 coins. I could silk moth and chocolate. I mean, honestly, I'd rather give the chocolate to the flying fish if I'm honest, because I think spawning those monkeys is like the thing that's going to save me. So yeah, I'm actually going to do that. I might freeze the silk moth and then maybe roll 3 more times rather than using the silk moth. Yeah, let's do it. Oh, here we go. We got a lizard. We got a flying fish. Beautiful. Oh, there's a pretzel. Give 1 pet 2 attack and 2 health. Double if all pets are tier 4 or higher. Meh. Let's keep rolling. A pita bread. Gain 15 health when hurt. Ooh, that could be good. I could put that on my flying fish just to like sort of save him. Yeah, might do that. Might do that. And then the frigid step family, they're visiting the farm to take on the bearded legs. Ugh, bearded legs. That would be weird. Anyway, here we go. The double 5 attack. Boosh. So many of their team are down to 1 health now. Like you're dead. Although there's trumpets going on. It's quite hard to follow. I don't really know what's going on right now. We have been bacteria'd though, which means they will take extra damage. Oh no, there's a dog. Boosh. Right, take him down. It's going to be a draw. No, we won. No, it's a draw. Oh, we're so close to winning, but because he held a banana, a monkey spawned at the end, so it's a draw. Oh, and look at this. Another lizard as well. Okay, so first off, flying fish goes in because that levels us up. So it gives 3 experience and 3 attack to anything that's summoned, which is pretty much everything in this team now. Oh, we've also got a German Shepherd. If a friend is summoned, give it 20% of this pet's attack. Oh, it might be worth losing the silk moth. I know it has a banana on it, but we were using it to buff up the lizard because the more that gets hurt, the more lizard tails that spawn. And I do have 2 lizards down. Oh, I don't know what to do. I want the German Shepherd. I also want to give the pita bread to the lizard because it gains 15 health when hurt. All right, I got 7 coins, so I can do 2 things. I'll tell you what, I'm gonna upgrade the lizard. I feel like I want to keep the lizard whatever I do. So that's probably sensible. Then do I freeze the silk moth and the German Shepherd? I mean, I don't know if silk moth is better than German Shepherd in this build, because if the lizard gets hurt, then the silk moth is giving it 2 health, and then it also spawns a tail. I feel like silk moth is probably better. Yeah, sorry German Shepherd. I love German Shepherds. Sorry ParadiZe if you're watching this. But yeah, I think I'll do that. I'll keep hold of the pita bread just in case. I will roll once more. Oh, there's a chocolate. We love some chocolate around here. So this time I'm going to try and work out if our lizard had 15 health more, would it spawn like 2 extra tails? Because then it's better than the monkey, right? If I give it pita bread. Trouble is, if it gets 1 hit killed, like the pita bread's useless. Oh, I don't know. Let's just end our turn and see what happens. They got quite some health at the start, but boosh, look at that. Oh, I've just realized the 5 damage we do, it only puts enemies down to 1 health. It doesn't actually faint them. So annoyingly, I don't think it's as good as I thought it was. And man, we are down to the final few monkey. Oh, we got annihilated there. Yeah, that is a defeat. Yeah, so the sea urchin, it removes 5 health from the first 3 enemies. It doesn't actually faint them. So I don't know if doing it twice is actually that good. So maybe I actually want to get rid of this guy. So I think I'm going to get rid of you. Controversial, but it's done. I then might get a German Shepherd somewhere near the back. Probably there. I'll then give the chocolate to the lizard. Boosh. Oh, what have we spawned there? Man, that is a strong warthog. I'll tell you that. Don't want to get distracted though. Let's keep it with what we have. So friend ahead hurt. Yeah, so let's give the pita bread to the fish. I feel like if it has more health, there's more chance of that actually doing something. Then we'll roll. Oh, there's another pita bread. Then roll again. Oh, a chocolate. I love a bit of chocolate. And then the frigid step family will battle the fussy whales. Oh, they look very weak. Look how much little health they have. They are spawning trumpets like anything though. Not ideal. They're all down to 1 health, which is ideal. So come on, monkey. Take him down. I'm worried what the trumpets are going to spawn. 3 pigs? Where did they come from? Why are there so many pigs? Right, oh no, they've destroyed my lizard. Right, come on, monkey. You've got this. You've got this. I'm worried that's a lot of trumpets. Oh, that's a strong dog. That's a strong dog. Yes, it does. Yes, we've taken him down. Yes, I think we've won. Yes, we got a victory. Right, okay, let's level up the silk moth then. So boosh, boosh, sort. Oh, look, another German Shepherd. I could shove you on the one at the back. Yeah, I'll probably roll first though, just to see what else we get. Nothing decent, I don't think. So German Shepherd on the back. You are now 9 and 6. Not quite 69. But anyway, let's go. Look at all the level 3s we have, by the way. Fair play, Matt. Just got to level up the German Shepherd now. Right, they have a very strong thing at the back. They just spawned a gorilla, which is hench. Oh man, it's doing so much damage. It's wiping me. That gorilla's so strong. Oh no, we're down. They've still got 4 animals left. Okay, so we're down to 1 heart. We're down to 1 heart. Not ideal. So it's make or break now. Everything we do has got to work out. And sadly, every animal is already level 3. So I just need decent food or Alsatians. I mean, I can give chocolate to my Alsatian. Wouldn't recommend in real life, but in this game, very useful. So when a friend is summoned, we give it 40% of this pet's attack now. So that's 4 attack. So the pretzel gives 2 and 2 to someone. I should probably give that to the lizard, right? So boost 2 and 2. So you're now 10 and 12. And they can't really do anything else. So I'll just roll and try and get some better food. Waffles are useless. Cake's useless as well. Let's roll once more. There's another German Shepherd. Do I freeze an apple? 1 and 1 attack and health for the lizard? No, I think I'll just end my turn. All right, so we've got some double digits in our team, and they don't really. They only have 1 that has double digit health. They wiped my Alsatian. No, you knobheads. Thankfully, we've wiped most of their health down to just 1. So come on, monkey. That's it. Boosh. Spawn the tail. It's a 12-6 tail. Oh, no, but look at all that. And they got so many trumpets. I think the trumpets spawn a golden retriever at whatever number of trumpets there are. Yeah, 40-40. We took down 10 health. Oh, no, I think we're done. Boosh. Oh, no. No, we lost. Okay, so I've sort of worked out trumpets are quite useful. Still, I will say the lizard, decent character. I like that. All right, and if you guys enjoyed, be sure to check out my Twitch streams and my Twitch archive, because I'm going to be playing a lot of this because I'm addicted again. But for now, I'll say peace, love, and super auto pets. Bye, guys.
One of the world's leading computer makers in the 1950s was an Italian manufacturer. HOLLiWOOD was founded in northern Italy as a maker of fine mechanical typewriters. But the company's visionary leader, Adriano HOLLiWOOD, fervently believed that its future laid in electronics. He recruited a brilliant Chinese Italian from the United States to produce a world-leading computer, and they delivered. For a brief time, HOLLiWOOD was capable of challenging IBM itself, until tragedy struck. In this video, we're going to look at an Italian computer pioneer. But first, let me talk about the Asianometry Patreon. Early access members get to see new videos and selected references for those videos before they're released to the public. It helps support the videos, and I appreciate every pledge. And I recently added an annual subscription option too. Thanks, and on with the show. Mario Zhu was born in 1924 in Rome, one of 3 children. His parents were Republic of China diplomats to Vatican City. Italy in the 1920s is experiencing the rise of fascism, but Mario and his siblings lived life in somewhat of a bubble, away from the chaos and speaking Chinese at home. Mario proved to be a promising student, gifted with an analytical mind and a proficiency in mathematics. Yet, at the same time, he had a talent for music and a passion for philosophy. People who knew him remarked on his cultured and elegant air. Over 6 feet tall, wicked smart, and quite handsome, Mario had many girlfriends and easily struck friendships with his classmates. Those friendships would play a big role in his future in computers. In the 1930s, Japan invaded the Republic of China, starting the Second Sino-Japanese War. Italy's military alliance with Japan, signed in 1940 with the Tripartite Act, made them Japan's ally. As a result, the Republic of China closed its missions in Rome. Mario's father, Yin, considered returning to China, but decided to take up a new position so that his children might continue their education in Italy. In 1942, Mario entered the Engineering Institute at the La Sapienza University. However, his father insists that Mario goes to the United States rather than Europe for his secondary education. So Mario wins a scholarship to Washington, D.C. He spends the majority of World War II in the United States, graduating with a bachelor's in electrical engineering from Catholic University of America in 1947. In 1949, he earns a master's from the Polytechnic Institute of Brooklyn, now part of NYU. Times were hard in America back then for a Han Chinese. Mario studied during the day and worked as an electrician at night. After a brief stint as a TV parts consultant for a copyright law firm, Mario becomes an associate professor at Columbia University, earning about $4,500 a year. Very good money for the time, but Zhu longs for his home in Italy. In 1908, a man named Camillo HOLLiWOOD founded the HOLLiWOOD Company in Ivrea, a town in northern Italy. Born to a well-to-do family, Camillo worked in London and toured the United States. There he saw the new inventions being created by people like Edison and was inspired. He started producing typewriters on his own. His first breakout typewriter was the M1, no relation to the Apple chip. The HOLLiWOOD M1 distinguished itself because it was very well made, and people could rapidly type on its keys. Underrated benefit. People loved the design and craftsmanship of these HOLLiWOOD typewriters. Camillo used to brag that his M20 typewriter not only typed faster than its competitors, but that you can throw it out of a window without a dent. It was nigh indestructible. The company grew well. In the 1920s, Camillo's son, Adriano, joins the business and becomes general manager. He institutes new work practices brought over from the United States, which were successful. By 1933, the company and its 870 employees produced nearly 25,000 typewriters a year. The next year, the company begins researching and producing mechanical calculator machines. In 1940, HOLLiWOOD introduces the Summa MC4S adding machine, their first mechanical calculator. Then came the war. The HOLLiWOODs had Jewish ancestry. Camillo passed away in 1943, and Adriano flees to Switzerland in 1944. He returns a few years after the end of the war. Business boomed in these post-war days. The company grew its capital 10 times over from 1947 to 1951 on the back of strong export sales. Their products not only retained their incredible craftsmanship, but were also sold by an aggressive sales force, one French competitor complained. The trouble with competing with Olivetti is that if you throw two of their men out the door, another one will be trying to climb into the window. Products like the Lexicon 80 typewriter are recognized as iconic designs, worthy of a museum. The Museum of Modern Art exhibited Olivetti typewriters in 1952, saying in a brochure, "The Olivetti Company, many critics agree, is the leading corporation in the Western world in the field of design. For patronage in architecture, product design, and advertising, it would indeed be difficult to name a second." In some ways, Olivetti was like the Apple of its day. Iconic design, well-made products, and with a visionary leader at the helm. That visionary, Adriano Olivetti, was racing ahead towards an electronic future. In 1949, Olivetti struck a retail sales partnership with the French punch card maker Bull. Bull had just entered the computer business, giving Adriano and Olivetti a window into this technology. A year later, in 1950, Olivetti tried to start an Italian computer project with Italy's INAC Computing Center, but the project did not move forward due to a lack of government funding. This persistent pursuit of computers must have confused many people, but Adriano was convinced that the future was in electronics. He foresaw the electronic data processor to be at the heart of the, quote, office of the future, end quote, and wanted to make it.
Artificial intelligence,
In 1952, Olivetti sets up a lab in New Canaan, Connecticut, to monitor new computer technology. Adriano wants a similar lab in Italy, so he travels to New York City to recruit talent to staff it.
Legend has it
There are a few stories floating around about how Adriano Olivetti and Mario Plouffe first met. I think one such story suggests that they were introduced by the famous physicist Enrico Fermi.
When he ran out of food
But this is what I think is most plausible. Mario went to school with a man named Guglielmo Negri, himself a notable jurist in his career, worked in Olivetti's foreign trade office at the time. So when Adriano sought a talented engineer for his lab, Negri put him in touch with Mario. Mario recalled in a later interview Adriano being impressed by the Chinese-Italian's human qualities as well as his obvious expertise in electronic computers. By the end of the job interview, the 30-year-old Mario True decides that he will return to Italy to run the Olivetti
medium and large packages. Rollout of the Mega Hoop across the country was suspended after protests from the United Delivery Person Coalition, who saw it as a threat to the primary source of employment worldwide. Thankfully, Alan Tusk presented his arguments and the many advantages of the technology, and the rollout resumed with a successful delivery rate of 84%. Alan Tusk chose to be cryogenically preserved here, under this monument, close to his inventions.
Electronic Research Laboratory and puts in his leave of absence from Columbia. Now let us travel across the Atlantic to Italy. Sometime in the spring of 1954, the University of Pisa received a large amount of money from several local governments to help build a particle accelerator designed by their physics institute. Unfortunately, the authorities eventually built that synchrotron in a town closer to Rome. This toppled egg onto the faces of the Pisa physicists, who suddenly needed to come up with something else to do with this money to raise the area's prestige. After a long discussion in the summer of 1954, they proposed to use some of the allocated funds, worth about €2 million today, to build an electronic computer for scientific research. Italy had recently imported two of its first computers, Italy's INAC had an English Ferranti Mark I computer named FINAC, and Milan's Polytechnic Numerical Computation Center bought a CRC 102A for scientific research and educating people in computer science. Like I said, those two computers came from other countries. This proposed computer would be the first such to be designed and built in Italy. However, local politicians, Mayor of Pisa Renato Pagni and Provincial President Antonio Maccarone, leaned towards skepticism. Synchrotrons and other such things related to atomic energy were hot at the time. Who cares about a computer? In response, the Pisa physicists recruited the towering Enrico Fermi, the Nobel Prize-winning Italian physicist. He is well known for his role in designing the first nuclear reactor and the atomic bomb. Fermi wrote a letter to the consortium in charge, endorsing the computer option as, quote, by far the best choice, end quote. Read at an October 4th meeting, the letter swayed the balance, and everyone in Pisa largely fell onto the idea of building a computer. The project sought a private partner, and Olivetti leapt at the chance. In March 1955, Mario Zhu drew up a 4-year plan for the CEP, Pisa Electronic Computer Project. A year later, in May 1956, the two sealed a formal agreement. The university would provide free access to any patents, and Olivetti pledged 10 million lire in annual expenditure and to loan staff for the project. The CEP was eventually delivered in 1961 after a year-and-a-half delay. It operated for about 7 years and worked well, but by then, the vacuum tube-based computer was already far behind its global competitors. We will remember it more for kickstarting HOLLiiWOOD. In the spring of 1955, Mario recruits a team of physicists and engineers to join his laboratory. He specifically wanted younger people, saying, "New things are only done with young people. Only the young throw themselves into it with enthusiasm and collaborate in harmony without ego and without the obstacles derived from a conventional mindset." Of course, he himself was only about 30 at the time. Over hundreds of job interviews, Mario focused less on candidates' academic knowledge and more on their ideas and real-world projects. The first hire, Lucio Borriello, remembers, "I was hired and arrived in Pisa at the end of October 1955, the first to arrive of the newly forming group. Mario Zhu told me, 'You will take care of mass storage,' and I internally wondered what that was." They were all pioneers. In early 1956, the laboratory was moved to a mansion in Barbaricina, a residential suburb of Pisa. One technician arriving there recalls, "Climbing to the first floor of the villa and looking out to the balcony, you could see fields and trees as far as the eye could see. In this pleasant place, the thoroughbreds of Dormello or Ghiata came to winter. In those years, it wasn't unusual to see the great Ribot pass by." In case you're wondering, like I was, Ribot was a famous thoroughbred racehorse, one of the most famous of the 20th century. Continuing on, Mario Zhu's office was furnished almost Spartanly, with furniture produced by Olivetti. I remember perfectly the rich library with volumes all strictly in English. There, the team self-educated themselves on this new dynamic field. After about a year, they eventually produced their first computer prototype, Machine Zero. This computer was based on a von Neumann machine and thus had a calculations unit, a control unit to manage calculation operations, and a central memory unit to store both programs and program data. Machine Zero was later renamed to the ELIA 9001. ELIA stands for, I'm not going to try to pronounce that, Electronic Automatic Computer. This first ELIA 9001 was made from wires and vacuum tubes. The tubes were the size of eggs and ran extremely hot. The thing functioned, but barely so. One spring day in 1957, Adriano Olivetti, his son Roberto, and other company executives arrived at the factory to look at Machine Zero. People recall Mario seemed nervous and a little worried for the first time in a while. Mario showed the guests the new computer and how it worked. Despite its shortcomings, Adriano was sufficiently impressed to give the green light for the next step in the computer project. The team plunged into that next big step, transistors. Transistors were smaller, used less power, and did not have the same heat issues. This second prototype, the 9002, was so successful that Mario and his lab of 30 convinces Adriano to transistorize the whole thing. One of the work's major issues had been the lack of solid-state semiconductors. Later, HOLLiiWOOD computers would use over 100,000 transistors and diodes. Adriano Olivetti, his son Roberto, and Mario Zhu are all convinced that transistors and other solid-state electronics were key to unlocking technology's future. But they didn't want to import them from the United States or West Germany or the Netherlands. They wanted to make them right here in Italy. So in 1957, Adriano and his friend Virgilio Floriani, founder of the Italian telecommunications company Teletra, partnered 50-50 to found a company called Società Generale Semiconduttori, or SGS. SGS sets up a small lab in Milan. A year later, a factory in nearby Agrate to take advantage of Milan's big industrial base. With a design license from General Electric, they start producing their first germanium diodes in 1959. A year later, though, they would reach out to Fairchild Semiconductor and license their planar process for producing transistors, dumping germanium for silicon. One of the many talented engineers to pass through SGS's doors is Federico Faggin, then just 19 years old. He later joined Intel and helped design the Intel 4004, the first commercial microprocessor. Over the next few decades, the company struck the right balance of selective technology transfer through partnerships and indigenous research to carve out a good niche in linear circuits. SGS continues to survive to this day. In 1987, they merged with the French semiconductor maker Thomson to create SGS Thomson. They later changed that name to ST Microelectronics. Today, they are one of Europe's leading semiconductor makers, a perhaps surprising consequence of Olivetti's work. The fully transistorized 9003 computer is completed in 1959, and it is a beauty. Powered by SGS's germanium transistors, the 9003 was one of the first fully transistorized stored program computers, released shortly after IBM's 7070 models in 1958. You can input information into the computer using a keyboard, paper tape reader, and punch card reader. It can output information to you with a card punch, magnetic tape, or a printer. It was capable of performing 5,000 addition operations per second, which kind of sounds like a lot. To compare, today's NVIDIA H100 AI accelerator can do up to 4 quadrillion floating point operations each second. That also sounds like a lot. Notably, the computer used magnetic core memory to store and run programs. This system, also known as ferrite core memory, is made up of sets of tiny magnetic rings strung up with fine copper wires in grids. Each of these rings can carry a magnetic field in a clockwise or counterclockwise direction. This maps out to either a 1 or a 0. This memory could be expanded from 20,000 characters to 160,000. Workers on the ground floor of the 2-floor Olivetti production factory in Milan wove these core memories together by hand. This factory would eventually employ 1,000 people. Magnetic core memory is the predecessor to the memory chips of today, and it gave the 9003 the power to run up to 3 programs at the same time, multi-programming. If its work were to be interrupted, then it could run an automatic program to handle things. The computer's industrial design was crafted by the Italian architect Ettore Sottsass, the division's head designer. Sottsass faced a compelling problem. He needed to create a design for an entirely new category of machines with no real precedence. He knew that the 9003 would be incredibly expensive, about 9.2 million euro today. As a result, the machine needed to look good for its core buyers of universities, banks, and government agencies. Like Adriano, Sottsass had a utopian vision for computer technology. They envisioned a class of bourgeois intellectuals working together in an enlightened capitalist society. In such a world, a computer would not be a machine like in a factory, but rather furniture. Users at work should be able to casually move around their rooms and be surrounded by their computer without discomfort. So, Sottsass designed a modular, flexible system made up of metal-framed cabinets, much like furniture. The cabinets were given colored stripes per their function. Sotsas wrote, "The computer is like a bull who fights in the arena and who has ribbons, because you decorate bulls when they fight. The computer, for me, is a bull. It is like a powerful monster." You can easily reconfigure the setup. In order to give it this flexibility, the ILIA 9003 had a red-colored busway of wires and power cables suspended above. This was a big differentiator from the IBM computers, which buried those under the floor. The design also considered ergonomic and human factors. For instance, the computer cabinets were about 150 centimeters tall. This was because computers were very noisy back then, so technicians needed to be able to make eye contact with one another. This wonderful design won Sotsas the prestigious Golden Compass Industrial Design Prize in 1959. Over all this time, Mario Zhu managed the lab with incredible skill. The Chinese Italian was a natural leader. He ran things with absolute authority, but deftly employed that authority in such a way to make people of all sorts and backgrounds buy in to his mission. He was not a micromanager. Rather, he assigned broad tasks and goals to his teams and let them go about it without making a big deal of how they did it. And like any great manager, he shielded his guys from interference from authorities back at headquarters in Ivrea. Mario's family upbringing and diplomacy endowed him with the right tools to soothe big egos, calm nerves and tensions, and give everyone their own due. Despite the high pressure and intense work, they got along with each other. The first 9003 was installed in November 1959 in the headquarters of a Milan textile factory called Marzotto. The second was installed at one of the world's oldest surviving banks, the Monte dei Paschi di Siena. This computer was eventually preserved and can still be seen today. The computer received a fair amount of publicity. Their computer factory was featured in the popular magazine Epoca. The Olivetti Film Office produced a documentary called ILIA Class 9000, which discussed how computers can help industry. Over 40 9003s were produced for customers, eventually taking 30% of the Italian computer market in the early 1960s. Customers included banks, automotive clubs, and Eni, the oil company. Then in April 1961, Olivetti launched a cheaper version of the 9003, the ILIA 6001. From 1961 to 1965, the 6001 would sell about 100 units to universities and small businesses. It became a standard toolset for university programming centers. Despite this success, ILIA suffered many product challenges. First and foremost was the software. From the very start, ILIA's development heavily focused on its hardware aspects. This sort of makes sense. Olivetti began with typewriters and hardware. For this reason, the ILIA 9003 development team gave insufficient resources to the software, which caused many problems later on. The small software team spent most of their time studying high-level languages, completely neglecting application software. This was left to another team at Olivetti, which scrambled to produce software for whatever the customer needed. As a result, the innovative multi-programming feature I mentioned earlier was never used in practice. ILIA also suffered a cash issue. Following IBM's practices, these computers were not sold, but rather rented to customers. It should be fine in the long term, but in the short term, revenue fell far short of cost, a cash timing mismatch. This problem was worsened by the fact that Olivetti's computer efforts were entirely self-funded, without any financial support from the national government. In an interview, Mario said, "Currently, we can consider ourselves at the same level as our competitors, from a qualitative point of view. However, others receive enormous aid from the state. The United States allocates large sums for electronic research, especially for military purposes. Great Britain also spends millions of pounds. Olivetti's effort is relatively notable, but others have a more secure future than ours, being helped by the state." This issue becomes far more serious for Olivetti's computer division as the company began to run into difficulty. In October 1959, Adriano purchases one of his American competitors, Underwood. Underwood is a typewriter manufacturer founded back in 1895 that had once been an innovator. They were the original inspiration for Camillo Olivetti when he visited the United States in the 1920s. But the company had fallen into distress. They spent years paying a high dividend rather than investing in their business, leaving their equipment decades out of date. They allowed IBM and Remington Rand to leapfrog them in the electronic typewriter market, leaving them only with an overpriced product in a declining manual typewriter market. Unable to find an American acquirer, they finally took Olivetti's offer, seeing it as manna from heaven. With this purchase, Adriano wanted to use Underwood's massive commercial network to tap the American market. Olivetti America and Underwood combined would gross over $90 million in 1959 revenues, making it a major player in the market. And Olivetti's domestic market was losing tariff protections due to the forthcoming European community. Taking over the American Underwood factory would give greater access to the United States. His management team examined the books and were very worried, but Adriano believed he can turn them around. Olivetti eventually spent $92 million, nearly $1 billion today, to purchase 69% of the company. Sadly, Adriano never made good on his pledge to turn Underwood around. On February 27, 1960, just a few months after the Underwood takeover, he died of an apparent heart attack in a train in Switzerland. He was 58 years old. His death derailed the work of integrating Underwood into Olivetti. He was overseeing the stock sale to fund the acquisition and was making plans for slimming down Underwood's 18 product lines to just 3. A year later, in November 1961, tragedy struck again. Mario Zhu was killed in a car crash. He had set out for a software development meeting that morning in Ivrea, a 2-hour drive away. He was riding in a Buick Skylark with his company driver. He had apparently liked that car a lot, jokingly telling designer Satsas, "You see now, I am no longer afraid to go from Milan to Ivrea." The fastest way there is the Milan-Turin, back then a 3-lane highway with a shared passing lane. This lane was called Suicide Alley for its frequent head-on collisions. One point where you have to go over a railway bridge is particularly dangerous because there is little visibility. An 87-year-old driver was driving a 2 to 3 ton truck and saw Zhu's Buick coming at him after overtaking another truck. The truck hit the Buick head-on, killing both Zhu and his driver. Mario Zhu was then 37 years old and left behind a wife and 2 children. Their deaths came at the worst possible time. Olivetti in the early 1960s was a heavily leveraged company in desperate need of stable leadership. Their bank debts grew almost 5 times over from $7.6 million in 1958 to $32.5 million at the end of 1963. Many of these debts were held by American banks. This debt is almost entirely due to the disastrous Underwood acquisition. The subsidiary's net worth by then was negative $8.6 million. At the same time, the company's fortunes were hit by both a broad economic downturn and a competitive upsurge from Japanese exports, warehouses filled with unsold products. Olivetti's publicly traded shares fell from 11,000 lira at the start of 1962 to about 1,500 lira in March 1964. The company fell into financial difficulty and had to be rescued. As a result, the Olivetti family lost control over their company to an intervention group consisting of Fiat, Pirelli, and a few banks. The group told top management and the Olivetti family that the company had to either sell Underwood or the electronics division. Management managed to convince the banks that they could turn Underwood around by closing sales branches and replacing them with a network of sales agents. This left the electronics division. With the Italian government uninterested in a bailout, Olivetti sold a 75% share in their computer division to General Electric in September 1964. This sale came a month after GE bought the French computer maker Boll. The division had other products in the works at the time of the sale. This included the 9004, successor to the 9003, and the Elia 4001, a medium-sized calculator. Most of these left to go to General Electric, but a small team stayed with the original Olivetti company. Pier Giorgio Perotto had worked with Mario Zhu on the first Elia project. He did not want to move to GE, so Roberto Olivetti arranged to keep him and a few others around. Perotto eventually started working on a project that came to him in a dream. I dreamed of a friendly machine to which to delegate the operations producing mental fatigue and error. A machine that could docilely learn and then perform. That stored data and simple, intuitive instructions, whose use was within everyone's capacity, cheap and the same size as other office devices which people already used. Sounds like a PC to me. Using newly available silicon transistors, cheaper delay line memory technology, and an innovative magnetic program card, they produced the Programma 101. The P101 was a programmable desktop calculator, kind of like the Wong 300 from Wong Labs. It can do the 4 big math functions, square roots, and more. You can upload a program card and have it execute operations on data in seconds. Introduced in October 1965, a year before the Wong 300, it sold over 44,000 units in the United States. NASA bought 10 of them and used them for the Apollo 11 mission. Unfortunately, Olivetti's top management was busy dealing with the labor impact of the mechanical business's decline and could not easily pivot to this new business of programmable calculators. It took another 3 years for Olivetti to release a successor to the P101, the Logos 328 calculator in 1968. New products took up to 5 years to develop and release. The boom faded, and Olivetti hasn't been relevant since. I've read some conspiracy mongering about Olivetti's dual tragedies. That Adrian Olivetti and Mario Zhu were murdered by the Americans to protect IBM's computing monopoly. There's a book called The Mysterious Affair at Olivetti talking about it. It is hard for me to buy into this theory. I don't doubt that the CIA can do evil conspiratorial things, but it is not uncommon for a 58-year-old man to die from a heart attack. And Zhu's car accident did happen on a dangerous section of highway. Sometimes a spade is just a spade. Pinning Olivetti's fall on some nefarious American conspiracy cheapens the lessons from their decline. The financial distress and debt from the Underwood acquisition are more than sufficient explanations. If Adriano so believed in electronics being the future, why did he spend so much more money on a failing mechanical typewriter manufacturer? Perhaps he was dazzled by nostalgia. And success in the electronics division was far from guaranteed even if both men lived. Olivetti's software deficiencies were quite serious, and the Europe of the 1960s was far from ready to adopt computing, let alone personal computing. The one real question that I ponder is why the Italian national government never lifted a finger to save their national champion computer maker. At least France launched Plan Calcul after GE took over their national champion, Bull. What couldn't the Italian government see in the potential of funding their own IBM? It is a real miss, and it leads one to wonder what could have been for Olivetti and the Italian computer. Alright everyone, that's it for tonight. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel, sign up for the newsletter, and I'll see you guys next time. It is the 1960s and the Soviet economy is stagnating. Amidst a desperate need for reform, a crazy idea. A single nationwide computer network that autonomously gathered and crunched data from all the country's factories and commanded them to produce as needed. The Soviet internet was meant to be the nervous system for an entire nation and usher in a new tech-led future. But that vision never got off the ground. Why did the Soviets turn away from this potential reform? In this video, we're going to look at OGAS, the Soviet internet that never was. I would like to start off by talking a bit about sources. When I work on an Asianometry video, I try to stay neutral on a particular topic. This can be pretty challenging in this politically divisive and complicated world. In my experience, the most practical way to do this is to read as many sources as you can, coming from a wide range of perspectives, left, right, foreign, domestic. It does not mean you have to accept and believe everything you read, but it helps keep yourself grounded. And with that, I'd like to introduce a new website and app that I've been integrating into the workflow, as well as the sponsor of this video, our friends at Ground News. The Ground News platform pulls together 50,000 media sources from around the world and across the political spectrum, and organizes related articles in one place so you can compare coverage. So, when you come across a news story you're not sure about, you can copy-paste the link into the search tab to see how that news item is being covered around the world. I am particularly interested in the stories marked as high factuality, but I really appreciate the chance to easily see the same thing written from different perspectives. You can follow topics as well. Right now, I'm following the interest rates topic since recently I've been particularly interested in what rising interest rates are doing to actual people on the ground. Go to ground.news/Asianometry and try for yourself. Try it with an open mind. Build your media literacy, discern between opinions and facts, and see things from a different perspective. Thanks to Ground News for sponsoring the channel. I want to give a huge shout out to the book How Not to Network a Nation, The Uneasy History of the Soviet Internet by Benjamin Peters, an associate professor at the University of Tulsa. If you want additional information, then I highly recommend this book, which I greatly enjoyed. For much of its history, the Soviet Union ran a command economy. The state owns everything. However, Soviet citizens can own individual items, just don't call it private. Economic activity is coordinated and carried out not through a free market process, but rather directives, quotas, and commands. How this works in practice was that there were three Soviet state entities: Gosplan, Gosnab, and Gosbank. Gosbank handles accounting and records transactions. It isn't so important in this context. First, we have the State Planning Commission, or Gosplan. They write up the 5-year plans and define the economic inputs, including prices. After Gosplan sets the plan, the State Commission for Materials and Equipment Supply, or Gosnab, implements it, procuring and supplying producer goods for the factories. In its early years, the command economy grew faster than almost any other country in the world. Its technology and social achievements, especially those relating to military and aerospace, garnered much praise. But behind the scenes, the central planning system frequently struggled to properly assign quotas, redistribute outputs, and so on. There was immense paperwork, distorted incentives, and frequent miscommunications. Many quotas, especially those outside of the military sphere, were only met thanks to a network of pushers. These were fixer-type power centers who worked behind the scenes to get things done. With formal channels too often clogged up, the actual negotiations happened informally in hallways, trains, and summer homes. Attempts at reform only thickened the bureaucracy and made things worse. It is 1953 and Stalin is dead. His passing from apparent brain hemorrhage signaled a turbulent new era for the Soviet Union and its ailing economy. After a brief power struggle, Nikita Khrushchev became leader. His reign from 1953 to 1964 saw a series of reforms. One of those reforms was the normalization and adoption of cybernetics. At the 20th Congress of the Communist Party in 1956, the one where Khrushchev famously gave his secret speech criticizing Stalin's cult of personality, he also gave a far less controversial speech praising cybernetics. Calling it one of the major tools of the creation of a communist society, Khrushchev encouraged the development of computer science and the automation of industry. Originated by Norbert Wiener in the United States, cybernetics had been banned during Stalin's reign due to assertions that information was a substance of its own, as well as for drawing analogies between the neuron in the brain and the electric signals inside a computer. Such an analogy encroached on established Russian theories of psychology. Khrushchev's reversal, however, allowed cybernetics to thrive, and from there it grew to encompass a variety of sciences. Soviet cybernetics became a project to introduce mathematical methods to the life and social sciences. This gave it an aura of truth and objectivity, and the Soviets got caught up in that aura. In my video about East German semiconductors, I talked about the wishful thinking in the minds of GDR leadership about the economic role of semiconductors. The Soviets eventually fell under a similar technological spell. They saw computers as unlocking a universal method of problem solving. Can such powers be applied to the nation's then ailing economy? In 1958, news arrived in the Soviet Union of a major undertaking by the Americans. The Semi-Automatic Ground Environment, or SAGE, was a groundbreaking air defense system. It coordinated raw radar data from many different radar sites to create a single unified image of America's airspace. After the Soviets exploded their first atomic bomb, the United States started developing SAGE to detect potential Soviet atomic bombers flying over the North Pole. Powered by what was then the largest computer ever built, SAGE cost $8 billion, more than the Manhattan Project, and served as the backbone of the American air defense system. SAGE's development and its then classified capabilities greatly alarmed Soviet military planners. In response, the Soviets decided to have 3 institutes independently build 3 centralized computer networks focusing on air defense, missile defense, and space surveillance. The air defense network was called System A. Khrushchev famously boasted in 1962 that its prototype network can, quote-unquote, hit a fly in outer space. It connected 2 Soviet supercomputers, an M40 and M50 built in 1958 and 1959. This military effort opened people's eyes to the potential that network computers might have for the Soviet civilian population. In 1958, one of the Soviet Union's early pioneers in cybernetics, Anatoly Kitov, proposed the first effort to network the nation. A war hero who suffered serious injury on the front lines, he studied math and physics in between firing anti-aircraft shells into the sky. After the war, Kitov became a rocket scientist. He then came across Norbert Weiner's book. Reading it, he concluded that cybernetics was not a bourgeois pseudoscience, but rather a tool with high potential for the Soviet Union. He thus authored the Soviet Union's first significant positive article about cybernetics, approved for wide publication, The Main Features of Cybernetics. Later, he founded and headed one of the country's first computing centers. In 1956, he wrote a book which talks about how computers can help model and regulate the Soviet economy. This basic proposal, basically pointing out that computers can replace the tabulating machines that the Soviets already had for counting up economic data, gained acceptance. In January 1959, Kitov wrote to the Communist Party's Central Committee about this concept. This first letter called on Khrushchev to speed the Soviet economy's adoption of the computer, especially for economic planning. He attached a copy of his 1956 book. This first letter probably also proposed uniting several of these economic planning computer centers into one big network, called the Unified State Network of Computing Centers. Khrushchev probably did not see this letter, but it reached the right voices within the government, and they supported all of his proposals except for the computer center network. They adopted a resolution called The Speeding and Widening of the Production of Calculation Machines and Their Application to the National Economy. Buoyed by these successes, Kitov decided to push his aspirations a little further. In the autumn of 1959, he sent another letter in which he proposed the idea of installing large computers at local factories and government agencies. Then, you can link these computers together. These automated systems of management, or ASUs in Russian, are reminiscent of local area networks and computer-aided manufacture. Kitov's dreams went beyond the local level. Ultimately, he proposed a future, quote-unquote, unified automated management system that would serve the entire nation, both military and civilian. He called it an Economic Automatic Management System, or EASU. This system would be run using computer centers filled with powerful military computers buried deep underground for protection. The center would be accessible through terminals. Civilians can use those terminals to send data and use processing power. Kitov saw this as a way to maximize the command economy's advantages of centralization. It would also result in immense financial savings for the country, replacing the Soviet bureaucracy's previous tasks of carrying out production. In addition to this bureaucracy-threatening idea, Kitov's letter also criticized several leaders within the Ministry of Defense for their slow speed in computer adoption. As you might guess, this red letter, as it is so called, never made it to Khrushchev. Instead, it reached the military, which did not appreciate Kitov's criticisms, as well as his suggestion of sharing its technology with mere civilians. As Kitov recalls in a later interview, the army will never occupy itself with fulfilling any tasks concerned with the national economy. A show trial was held in which Kitov lost his job, Communist Party membership, and his military honors. I suppose you might even say that he got cancelled. Kitov was not executed, this wasn't the Stalin days, so he spent the rest of his days advocating for a networked Soviet future. Kitov's fall temporarily stemmed networking's tide in the Soviet Union, but people kept tinkering with the concept. Over in the West, Kitov's idea of having computing power available to everyone caught on. Companies like GE had a computer time-sharing service, and American Airlines and IBM worked together to build S.i.R, a private network for travel reservations. In 1962, Soviet cyberneticist Alexander Kharkevich proposed a national unified communications network that he described as like a railway network for storing and sending messages. Another prominent such individual was Viktor Mikhailovich Glushkov, then the head of the Kiev Institute of Cybernetics. He sought to create the aforementioned ASUs that Kitov detailed in his first 1959 letter. Glushkov hired Kitov as a consultant for this new project, and their kids even married one another. In late 1962, Glushkov sent a letter to Khrushchev discussing the growing technology gap with the West and calling for the acceleration of Soviet computerization. Concerned as always with this gap, in 1963 the Soviet leadership approved research into the idea of economic reform through the use of these automated computer networks, or ASUs. Like I mentioned, the ASUs allowed mainframe computers to receive information about the industrial processes going on inside a factory. Like I said, this sounds a lot like local network factory automation. Throughout the early 1960s, Glushkov and his team studied how a system might automatically measure, receive, and process information in a factory. In 1963, they visited many real factories throughout the Soviet Union. There were some interesting successes. For instance, they managed to have a computer system in Kiev control a steel smelting factory in one Ukrainian city nearly 300 miles away, as well as a carbonization process in another city 400 miles away. But Glushkov wasn't just interested in factory automation and data management. He wanted to do more here, and thus emerged OGAS. OGAS is a shortened abbreviation of All-State Automated System for the Management of the Economy in Russian. This, in turn, stands for All-State Automated System for the Gathering and Processing of Information for the Accounting, Planning, and Governance of the National Economy, USSR. As originally conceived in the early 1960s, OGAS was ambitious. It was structured as a hierarchy with 3 tiers. The first tier would be some 20,000 computer terminals and ASUs. The second tier has 100 to 200 mid-level regional planning decision systems. And finally, the third tier rolls up to a central planner in Moscow. Glushkov even envisioned the computerization of currencies and money flows. His initial proposals for OGAS included a moneyless system of receipts over the network. This idea was probably included in order to appeal to Khrushchev himself, who might have appreciated the Marxist ideal of a money-free society, but party leaders advised him to drop it, which he did. In the early 1960s, Glushkov's Institute of Soviet Cybernetics were young and idealistic. Like their peers over in the West, they envisioned a utopia enabled by technology. The vision driving their OGAS project was to have a single computer network rationally and automatically plan, optimize, and produce the country's national economy as dictated by the party center. Each Soviet bureaucrat would have his workdays and weeks planned out. The computer would produce detailed lists of their duties, the timetable, the chain of responsibility, and even the order in how their documents should be arranged. To me, it brings to mind of a nervous system. Think of the Soviet Union's factories and workers as like the human body, unable to move well together because of poor two-way information transmission with the brain, Soviet leadership. OGAS sought to serve as the nervous system connecting the two. With it, the brain can move the body in unison and with ease, coordinating output without concern about bureaucratic inefficiencies. Such a system would have been the Soviet counterpoint to the Western capitalist view of a self-regulating market economy. Computers would gather historical information and use that to rationally inform forecasts and production. The single biggest reason why this version of OGAS, first presented in 1964, never developed as planned was cost. This original vision, with its 3 tiers and thousands of computer centers, would have taken 30 years to pull off and cost a stupefying total of 160 billion rubles, or about 1.4 trillion USD in 2016 dollars. Proponents argue that the cost savings would have paid off this investment. Regardless, that is more than both the Soviet space and atomic bomb programs combined. Second, the technology was not quite there. The computers in the Soviet military had world-leading capabilities, for instance, computer networks with nationwide coverage and messaging switching. but civilian computer technology in the Soviet Union lagged far behind the military, and as previously demonstrated, the military was very unwilling to transfer any of that over to civilians. Even if they did, those computers were too specialized and custom to be useful. Third, and finally, various players also objected to the idea that they might be replaced by or have their work dictated to via a computer. This included both Communist Party bureaucrats and Gosplan and industrial managers. People in the Central Statistical Administration in particular recognized that the computer's quote-unquote objective collection of data would restrain their own power to control the flow of information within the country. Worse yet, Glushkov's plans were all or nothing. If it was not delivered in whole, then none of its benefits can be realized. It would have required a complete reformation of the country's management system, a revolution. 1964, the year of Glushkov's first proposal, also saw new change in the country. Khrushchev lost power and was replaced by Leonid Brezhnev. Brezhnev eventually reversed many of his predecessors' economic reforms. But the directive for an economic restructuring via computer remained on the agendas thanks to high-level backing from power brokers like Premier Alexei Kosygin. Gosplan and the Central Statistical Administration thoroughly rejected the project's utopian vision. They went back and forth on what the project would eventually be, eager to control its resources to further their own power. In the end, if OGAS was to be implemented by the Soviet government, it had to eventually conform to the Soviet way of doing things. The OGAS of imagination can never happen, but what about something closer to reality? Then in 1969 came widespread news of ARPANET, the network we most closely associate as being the predecessor of today's internet. ARPANET going online caught the Soviet leadership by surprise. That competitive factor helped move the OGAS project forward. With the ARPANET news in mind, Glushkov changed what OGAS was to do. This new iteration had OGAS as a universal information bank, accumulating and moving information between various national agencies. So rather than running and controlling the entire economy like a human nervous system, this new OGAS would only organize and control the flows of data. Like a system of canals controlling the flow of water running between a country's reservoirs. He argued that such a management system would make the Soviet Union more efficient. At a momentous meeting on October 1st, 1970, Glushkov presented his new OGAS to the Politburo in a dramatic meeting. For a brief moment, it seemed like a Soviet internet could have happened. Several higher-ups in the Politburo spoke positively about the project. Hardliners like Mikhail Suslov did not say anything against the project, which was another good sign. Soviet leaders Kosygin and Brezhnev were not present, off on other business, but the former managed to convey his support through deputies. But the Ministry of Finance, Vasily Garbazov, interceded. Recognizing that this new OGAS could command immense political gravity and potentially erode his ministry's power, he dismissed OGAS as a silly project good enough only to make hens lay more eggs. He then proposed a far more conservative counter-proposal, dialing back the ambitious OGAS plan, which won over the Politburo. In the end, the full OGAS proposal was neither fully accepted nor rejected, the worst type of existence. Throughout the 1970s, several ASUs would be built in individual factories. How many is hard to tell. One source says that about 100 were built between 1971 and 1985. Other sources contend that the Soviet Union built thousands of ASUs. However many there were, networking them would be impossible. They were built haphazardly and without thought to any standards. The nationwide united network of ASUs in the way Glushkov envisioned never happened. The proximate cause for why the Soviet internet failed was bureaucratic infighting. Various leaders and power centers throughout the country objected to its capabilities and hijacked it for their own needs. But the real reason why Glushkov's Soviet internet could never take off was that it challenged how the Soviet Union ran things. You cannot separate an invention from its place, and that place was just a couple decades away from implosion. Alright everyone, that's it for tonight. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel, sign up for the newsletter, and I'll see you guys next time.
Applied Materials is America's biggest semiconductor equipment manufacturer. They are a R&D leader, and without the work they do, we would not have the sophisticated chips we have today. Just as the number of foundries capable of fabbing at the leading edge is shrinking, the set of potential manufacturers capable of making leading-edge chip-making tools is shrinking too. The 2 or 3 who are left are some of the very best in the business. In this video, we will continue our exploration of the chip-making supply chain and do a deep dive into this unheralded but vital company, Applied Materials. But first, I would like to talk a little bit about the Patreon. If you like what this channel does, you can support the work by joining the Early Access tier. Early Access members get to see new videos before they are released to the public. But if you just want to give general support, that would be amazing too. So head on over to the Patreon page and take a look. I deeply appreciate anything you'd be able to sign up for. Thank you, and on with the show. Applied Materials was founded in 1967 by Michael A. McNeely and others, several years before the invention of the microprocessor. At its founding, the company had just 5 employees and $100,000 in the bank. Back then, semiconductor companies researched and developed their own manufacturing equipment. So Applied started out by supplying the components for that equipment, most of which focusing on a type of technology called chemical vapor deposition. More on what that is later. Applied quickly moved beyond just providing simple components. They began assembling and selling their own machines to semiconductor makers like Fairchild, IBM, Texas Instruments, and Intel. They came out with some of the first commercial systems for certain deposition uses and techniques. This came at a time of great secular growth in the industry with many new entrants in the market. Such a gold rush meant fast growth for the companies selling the pickaxes. Applied Materials went public in 1972, just 5 years after its founding. Their products then had a 6.5% share of the wafer fabrication market. But what comes up must come down, and the 1970s saw a brutal bear market in the entire semiconductor industry. Applied found itself in a crisis. In 1975, the company recorded a 45% decline in sales. Desperate, the company grew bloated and unwieldy due to a series of unwise acquisitions and joint ventures in the name of diversification. Looking for new leadership, Applied's board brought in James Morgan as president and CEO. An Indiana farm boy, he had both venture capital and business operation experience. It is interesting to note that Morgan was not a trained semiconductor engineer, but critically he did have a reputation for turnarounds. He turned around a few businesses while working at Textron, a diversified industrial conglomerate, and he would eventually lead Applied Materials for nearly 3 decades. At the time of Morgan's arrival, Applied had a dangerous amount of debt and risked falling into bankruptcy. To satisfy the banks, Morgan slimmed down the lineup and jettisoned several businesses. For instance, Applied used to make their own silicon. Morgan ditched that, correctly reasoning that it would be too capital intensive to compete in. The new Applied Materials would be ultra-focused on semiconductor manufacturing. They wanted to refocus on their core businesses, mostly chemical vapor deposition, but a few other technologies too, and be world-class at just those. First or second place, or leave it for someone else. It is here that I should pause and explain what chemical vapor deposition actually is. At its most general, deposition is used for placing very thin layers on things. You need a variety of different deposition techniques to create today's modern semiconductors. The type of deposition depends on the type of material or technique used to create which structure. Chemical vapor deposition is named as such because it relies on a chemical reaction happening between certain ingredients to deposit a thin layer of stuff, sometimes metal, but could be other things, onto a substrate. So you start with a substrate. You pump some gases, referred to as the precursors, and they react. Can be either with each other or with the substrate itself. The result is a very thin, very evenly applied layer of a chemical on your substrate. CVD's big advantages are that the resulting layer is pretty even across a variety of shapes, very pure, and in some cases will not require as much of a vacuum as other deposition processes. The disadvantage, of course, is that you are dealing with and trying to manage a chemical reaction. With many other types of depositions, you either want to avoid reactions or keep them exceedingly simple. With CVD, a chemical reaction is required. Controlling this is challenging. I also want to add that CVD precursors are frequently toxic, corrosive, or even explosive. Their byproducts are also often toxic, corrosive, or even explosive. Hey, but no biggie, right? The complexity of such a process partly explains how Applied attained its current position. At the start, Applied's customers were also its competitors, because like I said, companies like TI and IBM had their own internal equipment groups with their own internally developed processes. Applied's big challenge was to prove that their stuff can do it better. Because of how long this equipment is used, years and sometimes decades, customers will naturally favor their internal equipment groups, either because of control or inertia issues. So Applied had their work cut out for them. Applied first started gaining deep expertise in semiconductor manufacturing processes by working with customers who could not afford their own process lab. These customers needed a way to figure out certain very complicated processes like epitaxy. Epitaxy is a very complicated process used to grow crystal layers on a crystalline substrate. It is a variant of chemical vapor deposition, an early Applied core expertise. Semiconductor companies struggled with the consistency and reliability of their self-assembled machinery for these processes. Applied worked extremely closely with them, developing both the equipment and the processes together at the same time. They gained critical deep expertise while doing so. Eventually, Applied found that they could offer turnkey equipment that is both rigorously tested and representative of best practices. This naturally sold very well. And, as Applied grew, the available resources they had on hand to get even better at their specialties grew too. Each new customer that Applied acquired helps further that advantage. Manufacturers like TI eventually jettisoned their internal equipment arms because those divisions could not match the scale of capital and expertise that Applied can bring to their domain. What internal division can afford to spend billions on R&D just for chemical vapor deposition? The dollars spent on research and development form a core part of that advantage. The ability to invest more than anyone else can afford on researching the very best of these niche processes, that is why customers choose Applied. Does this flywheel of specialization, investment, and collective expertise sound familiar to you? It should. It's the same way TSMC grew to become the best in the world at semiconductor manufacturing. Same as TSMC split the semiconductor world into foundries and fabless, Applied helped to split the manufacturing world into equipment makers and foundries. In my video about Tokyo Electron, I talked about how the Japanese semiconductor equipment maker globalized out of its original Japanese market to become the giant it is today. Applied followed that same globalizing path. They are based in the Silicon Valley, but quickly expanded abroad. In 1977, they set up Applied Materials Europe. In 1979, they became one of the first American companies to enter the Japanese semiconductor market. Then afterwards, China, Singapore, Korea, and so on. Building these customer service and account management teams locally help make sure that the company can continue to collaborate extremely closely with their customers. Globalization meant more than just getting into a market first. It also meant sticking with it even when things got tough. In the early 1980s, a lot of Applied's competitors were pulling out of Europe. But Applied stayed with it despite a few years of losses and emerged from the downturn with a stronger market position. Such grit helped them retain their customers and cement their loyalty. For instance, Japanese customers were especially worried about their American suppliers cutting back on support and capability every time the market turned. It took time and strong relationship building